The attack was never just a reaction. It was a construction, laid down layer by layer in the shadows of misdirection. In a world where everything is connected, very little happens in isolation. The surface explanation is always offered to calm the minds of the distracted. Security concerns, intelligence assessments, preemptive self-defense. But if one is still enough to listen beyond the noise, it becomes clear that deeper forces are in motion. Israel's strike on Iran was in truth a strategic distraction, a redirection of the gaze, both global and domestic. To understand this, one must first understand the nature of control. Control is not about force, it is about focus. Whoever controls the focus of the masses controls the direction of their thoughts, their fears, and ultimately their actions. At a time when internal dissent grows, when political pressure brews from within, when economic uncertainty becomes visible even to the indifferent, a government may choose to divert attention outward. History is filled with such patterns. Leaders facing instability often manufacture external crises to unify their people, justify extreme actions, and consolidate fading power. The enemy outside becomes more convenient than facing the truth within. Now consider the timing. Why now? Why this target? Iran is not new on the geopolitical chessboard. Its nuclear ambitions are not a secret, nor are its alliances. Yet, for years, diplomacy danced in circles, while threats hovered in the air like storm clouds refusing to rain. What changed was not Iran, but the internal reality within Israel's own borders. With political divisions deepening, protests erupting, and the confidence of the population wavering, the leadership needed a pivot point, a place where they could channel the growing tension, the uncertainty, and the doubt. The strike on Iran served that purpose. It reset the conversation. Suddenly, questions of internal disunity were replaced with declarations of national security. Criticisms of leadership were silenced under the banner of patriotism. The attention of the people, once inward and critical, was now outward and reactive. But this is not just about Israel. It is a universal strategy used by powers throughout history. Distraction is the ancient art of manipulation. It is not the absence of attention. It is the redirection of attention. When a magician performs on stage, he waves one hand to distract while the other executes the trick. Nations do the same. They wave flags, issue warnings, and launch missiles, while behind the scenes, deeper operations unfold unnoticed. Financial deals, legislative shifts, surveillance expansions, all done while the world watches the smoke rise in distant deserts. The true impact of the distraction is not in the attack itself, but in what it allows to go unnoticed during the chaos. For the individual, the lesson is just as urgent. Every day, we are being distracted. The human mind is pulled in many directions. News, emotions, noise, screens, fears. Each distraction takes a little more of your awareness, your focus, your energy. And just like nations, if you lose focus of what matters, you become vulnerable to manipulation. That is why discipline matters. That is why inner awareness is not just a spiritual luxury, but a necessity. If you cannot control your attention, someone else will. The world outside is a mirror of the world inside. When leaders distract the people, it is because they are already distracted within themselves, disconnected from principle, from clarity, from the deeper purpose of leadership. There is also a message to be learned in how reactions are shaped. The moment the attack was made, narratives were prepared, press briefings were written, and opinions were broadcast. A story was constructed, not necessarily to reflect truth, but to reflect intention to guide the emotions of the audience toward a specific conclusion. But truth is not emotional. Truth is silent. It waits patiently beneath the noise, observed only by those who do not rush to believe the first explanation. Therefore, learn to observe without reacting. When you are given a story, ask yourself, who benefits from this version of events? What is being left out? What am I being directed to feel, and why? This is not to defend one side or blame the other. This is to awaken, to see the pattern beneath the politics, to see that conflict often serves purposes far removed from the battlefield, that strategic attacks are often not about eliminating threats, but about shifting perception. The strike on Iran was a message, not just to Iran, but to the world, to internal critics, to international allies and enemies alike. It was a performance, and like all performances, it must be watched with both eyes open. One to see what is being shown, the other to see what is being hidden. In stillness, there is vision. While the world reacts, you can reflect. While others panic, you can prepare. While nations launch distractions, you can strengthen your focus. That is how you avoid becoming a victim of the game. By stepping back and seeing the board. There are always players behind the pieces and intentions behind the moves. But only the observer can understand the strategy. Only the still mind can see the truth. Therefore, do not be consumed by the headlines. Do not let your emotions be hijacked by external storms. Realize that distraction is a tool of power, and clarity is the resistance. When one sees through the distraction, one becomes free. Not from the events of the world, but from the manipulation of mind. In freedom, there is power. Not the power to destroy, but the power to remain unshaken, even when missiles fall. That is the strength we must seek. Not in arms, but in awareness. Not in reaction, but in reason, and not in the noise of war, but in the silence where truth speaks. In every conflict between nations, the first explosions are not felt in the sky, but in the hearts of men. The war between Israel and Iran is not just a geopolitical event. It is a magnified expression of something much older, much closer, and far more dangerous. The war outside is a reflection of the war within. Every bomb dropped, every threat issued, every retaliation carried out on foreign soil is a mirror image of the chaos, confusion, and unresolved conflict within the souls of those who command it. What we see on the news is only the physical manifestation of internal dissonance projected outward. When a person is unsettled, they become reactive. When a leader is unsettled, they pull nations into their storm. And when nations are at war within themselves, they turn their gaze outward to find someone to blame, someone to strike, someone to bear the burden of their own unrest. This is why understanding war is not just the job of politicians and generals, but of every human being. Because each one of us contributes to the collective vibration of humanity. If enough people live in peace within themselves, the world around them begins to transform. But when fear, anger, pride, and confusion dominate the inner realm, it doesn't stay hidden. It leaks out into relationships, into communities, into cities, and eventually into global affairs. A nation, after all, is nothing more than a collection of individuals. And individuals at war within themselves inevitably create environments of tension and destruction. It leaks out to form something else, environmental cloud. its entire migration into these so-called boundless possibilities. A nation, after all, is nothing more than a collection of people. It's an empty so to observe the conflict between Israel and Iran is not only to witness history unfolding, it is to witness human nature unraveling. It is to see what happens when inner discipline is lost, when the ego leads, and when silence is replaced by noise. Look at the language used in war. Words like defense, retaliation, deterrence, all of these are outer expressions, but they are rooted in inner instability. On the main, in some senses, in inner instability, on 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 stable, balanced mind does not retaliate, it responds with wisdom. A disciplined mind does not strike out in fear, it chooses clarity over impulse. When a government or a military chooses violence as a first resort, it is not a sign of strength. It is a confession. A confession that other options were abandoned or ignored. A confession that fear is driving the hand that launches the missile. And where does that fear come from? It comes from disconnection. Disconnection from self, from truth, from the deeper purpose of existence. The same applies to each person. When we lash out in anger, when we act out of jealousy or insecurity, we are at war within. It is not the other person we are fighting. It is our own reflection. And just as nations justify their attacks by pointing at the faults of the other, so too do we justify our anger by pointing at what others have done to us. But blame is a weapon that never leads to peace. It only deepens the division. Only through stillness can understanding arise. Only through reflection can clarity emerge. When the inner war is resolved, the outer conflicts begin to fade. This is why ancient teachings have always emphasized self-mastery over the conquest of others. A man who cannot govern his mind should not be trusted to govern a nation. Through reflection can govern, and a leader who reacts in anger endangers not just himself but millions. The same rule applies in our personal lives. The more we allow our emotions to dictate our decisions, the more damage we cause. And just as a war between nations leaves behind ruins, a war within ourselves leaves behind emotional wreckage. Regret reveals relationships, lost peace. Israel's attack on Iran, at its root, reveals more about Israel's own condition than Iran's. The evil, unmental condition, self-esteem, and unrelief, the more about Israel's own condition than Iran's. The evil, unmental condition, selfishness, ember, selfie, selfishness, ember. A confident, centered nation does not act with haste. It does not seek validation through aggression. The strike was not just against a military target. It was an expression of a deeper unrest, a statement not of dominance, but of fear, the fear of losing control, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of uncertainty. And Iran's response, whether verbal or physical, will likely be driven by similar inner storms, pride wounded, ego provoked, dignity questioned. These are not military calculations, they are emotional reactions. This is why real peace cannot be achieved through treaties alone. Treaties are agreements between minds, but peace must be born in the heart. Until individuals find peace within themselves, no piece of paper will hold back the tide of war. This is true whether the battlefield is global or domestic, whether it spans continents or fits within a single relationship. Inner peace is the foundation. Without it, everything else is a house built on sand. The path to ending war is not only through diplomacy, but through discipline. A mind that is trained to observe its thoughts, to question its emotions, and to restrain its impulses is a mind that cannot be manipulated into hatred. It is a mind that does not fall for the illusion of enemies and allies. It sees clearly. It understands that division is often constructed by those who benefit from conflict. And so it does not contribute to the noise. It chooses stillness. It chooses to master itself. We must ask, if war is a mirror of the internal, what does it say about us as a species that we continue to repeat this cycle? Perhaps it means we have not yet learned to master our own nature. Perhaps it means we are still easily provoked, easily controlled, easily lost in stories of right and wrong, forgetting the higher truth that we are all temporary travelers on the same fragile earth. The missiles that fall may be aimed at borders, but they always injure the soul of humanity. And if we feel no pain watching it, it means we have become numb, and numbness is the final sign of inner disconnection. So, the tombstone message is, this is our time. No more mis-agenda. Sum this situation. There is not death, but rebirth and victory. And we find an inner disconnection to sun, air, arm. But there is another way. There is the path of self-awareness, of choosing to reflect before reacting, of learning to listen, not to the noise of media or the shouting of politicians, but to the still voice within that always knows the truth. That voice does not speak in fear. It does not command violence. It whispers of unity, of responsibility, of a peace that cannot be shaken by war. That voice is within everyone, and the more we listen to it, the more the outer world begins to change. In the end, the war between Israel and Iran may not be ours to stop, but the war within ourselves is. And when enough people choose peace over pride, clarity over chaos, silence over noise, the world will begin to shift. Because the real battlefield is not out there. It never was. The real battlefield is here, within the space between thought and action, between fear and truth. And when that battlefield is mastered, there will be no more need for missiles. There will be no more need for blame. There will be no more need for war. Only then will we know true peace, not as a moment, but as a way of life.